Welcome everyone. We're on the bottom of Daf Tes Amud Aleph, the last three lines of the two dots. The Gemara previously was discussing that we were nigal, we were redeemed from Mitzrayim in the middle of the night, and everybody agrees we left the next morning. Now the Gemara continues quoting the following pasuk: Daber no b'nei ba'oznei ha'am v'gomer. Speak, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Klal Yisrael, and have them request from their Egyptian neighbors to give them their riches, their gold and their silver. Omrei debe Rabbi Yonai, ein no elo loshen bakosha. This was a request, please, beseeching Moshe Rabbeinu to ask Klal Yisrael on his behalf to ask their neighbors. Omar le Rabbi Baruch le Moshe, bakosha mimcha. I request of you, leich emor lahem li Yisrael, bibakosha mikem. Go ask Klal Yisrael. I request of you, Shalu mimitzrayim klei kesef v'klei zov. Ask from Mitzrayim their gold and their silver. Shelo yoymar oisoy tzadik avavodum v'inu oisom kiyem bohem. That tzaddik Avram Avinu, who I told at the bris bein besorim in Parshas Lech Lecha, that I will then enslave Klal Yisrael and they will be afflicted. That there was a kiyum. That happened. But after they left, the next part of the havtacha of the nevuah was, and they will go out with a rechush gadol, with great wealth. Maybe that was not kayim. So I want that to be also made sure that was included in the kiyum of my havtacha, of my nevuah. Omru loi, they said to him, Ulevai shenetzi batzmeinu, Moshe Rabbeinu, halavai that we should just go out ourselves. Forget about the riches, forget about the wealth. Moshel la'odam shahaya chavush b'beis ha'asurim. It's a parable of a person who is held in prison. V'hayu omrim loy b'nei odam moitzino eschol l'mocha b'beis ha'asurim. V'noisnin l'cha momon harbe. There are people who are going to then extricate you and take you out of the prison, and they will give you a lot of wealth. V'omer lahem b'vakosh mikem. He says back to them, I request of you, please, Hotzianu hayoim ve'eni mevakesh klum. Take me out today, I don't want anything else, just take me out of my imprisonment, of my shibud. Then the Gemara brings the pasuk, and I'll quote you the pasuk in full. V'Hashem nosan eschein ha'am b'nei Mitzrayim, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Chen, favor in the eyes of Mitzrayim. Vayashilum vayinatzlu es Mitzrayim. Here the Gemara quotes this word Vayashilum, and they granted their request. Says the Gemara, Omer Rabbi Ami melamed shehishilum bal korcham. It didn't say that they borrowed, but that shehishilum, they caused to borrow, and therefore it was against their will. Against whose will, says the Gemara? There is an opinion that says that is against the will of the Mitzrayim, that the Mitzrayim didn't want to give, and Klal Yisrael said, you must give, and they gave. HaKadosh Baruch Hu put it chen in their eyes to ultimately give, but they didn't want. But there's another opinion that says it was against the will of Yisrael. The Gemara explains, Man da Omer Bal Korcham de Mitzrayim d'chsiv unavas Bayis techalek shalol. Unavas bayis is a reference to Klal Yisrael. Techalek, you shall divide the shalal, the booty. Booty is a reference to something that's taken in war, and therefore it was against the will of the Egyptians. Man da Omer Bal Korcham di Yisrael mishum mosui. The one who says it's against the will of the Jews is because it was a burden to have to then carry out all of that wealth with them. Leaving Mitzrayim, they prefer to get that all at the sea and save them all of that travel with the heavy loads on their back or on their donkeys until they get there. Says the Gemara weiter, the rest of the verse, Vayinatzlu es Mitzrayim, and they emptied out Mitzrayim from all of their wealth. Om Rabbi Ami melamed she'asu kemitzuda she'ein ba dogon. This teaches us that they made Mitzrayim like a mitzuda, like a net, where you normally put the bottom of the net some grain in order to attract the birds to come and fly in onto the net and then close the net and catch the birds. Well, there's not even that grain to be put on the bottom of the net. That's how empty Mitzrayim was. Rabbi Ami Melamed, Reish Lakish Omar Asu Kimitzula She'ein Badogim. Reish Lakish learns that it was like compared to a mitzula, the bottom so deep down in the sea where there's no fish that swim in that area. So too, there was no fish, so to speak, at all in Mitzrayim. There was nothing there. It was all empty, like the bottom of the sea. Says the Gemara, quoting the following verse in regards to the Geula. This was stated at the Sneh, the burning bush, when Akash Baruch Hu came to Moshe Rabbeinu, and he said, "Tell the Jewish people that I'm going to redeem them." And Moshe Rabbeinu said, "What should I tell them your name is?" Says Akash Baruch Hu in this pasuk, "Ekia asher Ekia." I'll read the whole verse inside. Vayomer Elokim el Moshe, Ekia asher Ekia. I will be that which I will be. Vayomer, and then it says right afterwards, Koi soymar livnei Yisrael. This is what you should say to Bnei Yisrael. Ekia shalachani aleichem. So he changed in the middle of the verse from Ekia asher Ekia to just Ekia. Says the Gemara to explain. Ekia asher Ekia. Omar Akash Baruch Hu leMoshe, Leich emor lahem liYisrael. Go and speak to Klal Yisrael and tell them, Ani hayisi imachem b'shibud zeh, v'ani ehyeh imachem b'shibud malchios. I'll be Ekia with them here now in this shibud, and I will also be with them Ekia in the future shibudim. Omar lefonov, Moshe Rabbeinu says back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono shel olam, daya letzara b'shaitza. It's enough the tzara now. You don't have to then tell them about a future tzara. It's overwhelming. Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu was maskim, lech emor lahem Ekia shalachani elechem. Rather tell them that I will be with them. I sent you, and I will be with you now in this shibud, taking you out of Mitzrayim. Says the Gemara, quoting another verse, Aneni Hashem Aneni. This is a verse in regards to Eliyahu Novi. Amar Rabbi Abahu. Some say this is Rabbi Ami, and that's what's the reason why we're bringing this verse here, because Rabbi Ami made the previous statement explaining to us what the verse of Ekia asher Ekia is. So, Lama Omar Eliyahu Aneni Beis Pe'omim. Why did Eliyahu Novi say Aneni twice? Why didn't he just say Aneni or Aneni Hashem? Why Ani Hashem Aneni? Says the Gemara Melamed, She'omar Eliyahu lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That Eliyahu Novi was saying before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono shel olam, Aneni sheteir de'esh min hashamayim v'toichal kol asher al hamizbeach. The first Aneni is saying, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please bring down a fire and consume that which I'm putting on the mizbeach. Ve'aneni, the second Aneni, shetasiyach daitam kedei shelo Yomi Masechet shofim hem. They shouldn't claim that it's a Masechet shofim. They should realize that it's min hashamayim. Shenemar says va'ato hasiboisa es libam acharonis. Says the Mishnah. Until now, we've been discussing from the first Mishnah the various times of Kriya Shema Shel Arvis. Now the Gemara moves on to the Kriya Shema Shel Shacharis. In other words, the pasuk says Uv'shoch becha uvkumecha. So we dealt with the Uv'shoch becha when lying down or while you're lying down. What are the zmanim for saying Kriya Shema Shel Arvis? But now the Mishnah discusses uvkumecha, what's considered to be the parameters for saying Kriya Shema Shel Shacharis. Says the Mishnah, Me'ei masai karin es shma b'shacharis. From when can a person begin the earliest time to say Kriya Shel Shacharis? Says the Mishnah, Mishayakir ben tcheles lelovan. From the time the person distinguishes between white and a greenish blue called tcheles. When there's enough light that is shining in order for a person to make that distinction, that's when a person can then begin saying Kriya Shema Shel Shacharis. That will be the time that most people still get up, Uvkumecha. Rabbi Eliezer Oimer ben Tcheles lekarti. Rabbi Eliezer says a later time. You need more light because you have to distinguish between tcheles, a bluish green, and karti, which is green. So therefore they're closer in color, and therefore you need more light to make that distinction. V'goimra, and Rabbi Eliezer goes on to say, and you can still say Kriya Shema, lechatchila, ad hanetz hachama, until the netz hachama, until the sun begins coming up. When you start seeing the top of the sun, that is when you can then complete and say your Kriya Shema. Until that time is still lechatchila. Rabbi Yoshua Eimer ad shloi shos, he says you can still say Kriya Shema until the third hour. Why? Shekain derech malachim la'amod b'shalosh shos, because the way of malachim are to still get up in the end of the third hour. However, hakare mikan ve'elech lo hifsid ke'odam hakare b'Torah, meaning to say it's true you are going to lose out saying Kriya Shema in the right time, which is a bittul the mitzvahs aseh of Kriya Shema shel shacharis. But lo hifsid here means that he will still get reward. Firstly, he will still be able to say the Birkas Kriya Shema, but secondly, like the Mishnah goes on to say, Ke'odam hakare b'Torah, he'll still get reward for saying psukim in the Torah. Kriya Shema, of course, is written in the Torah, and these are psukim in the Torah. Says the Gemara, Mai bein tcheles lelovon. What is between tcheles and lovon that the Mishnah mentions is the earliest time lechatchila to say Kriya Shema? Ilema ben gavava de amro chivra legava de amra de techelosa. If you want to say that it's a piece of wool that is white next to a piece of wool that is tcheles, that is a bluish green. Ha belel yanami made the yadei. Even at night, when it's not so lit, a person can still make such a distinction from the stars and from the levana, from the moon. Ela ben tcheles sheba leloven sheba. But rather, we're talking about a pair of tzitzis in the talis and the tzitzis, where you make a distinction between those strings that are white and that which is bluish green, tcheles. Then it's enough light to then be able to say Kriya Shema shel shacharis. Tanya, the Gemara now brings a brisa with some other opinions. Rabbi Meir Oimer Mishayakir Bein Ze'ev LeKelev. Ze'ev and Kelev are from the same type of family, and therefore they look similar. So when you have enough light to distinguish between a Ze'ev and a Kelev, a wolf and a dog, that's enough time. That's therefore the time when a person can still can begin saying Kriya Shema Lechatchila Shel Shacharis. Rabbi Akiva Oimer Bein chamor le'aroid, between a chamor, a donkey, and a wild donkey. Here it's even more similar, and therefore you need more light to distinguish between the chamor and the aroid. V'acherim oimrim, and the acherim say, Mishe yire es chaveroi rochog daler amos vayakirenu. When a person is at a distance of somebody that he knows who visits him here and there, at a distance of Daled Amos, and he can recognize him. Not somebody who comes regularly, then he can recognize him even when it's darker. And not somebody who barely knows and never sees, then he needs even more light. But somebody who can recognize because he comes to him somewhat here and there, and therefore that's enough light to distinguish who he is. That's the time when a person can say Lechatchila Kriya Shema Shel Shacharis. And by the way, that's the same time that we had in the Mishnah Bein Tcheles Lelovon. Says the Gemara, Omar Rav Huna halacha ki acherim. That's the halacha what we just said. Mishayirena es chavei rachok daled amos v'akirenu, which is again between white and Tcheles of the tzitzis. Omar Abaye letfilin ki acherim. Lechatchila, a person can only put on tefillin and only say a bracha when it's like the acherim saying, when it's at this distance of Daled Amos, for a person who knows ktsas, a person, and can recognize him from a distance of Daled Amos. Lekriya Shema, but the ideal time to say Kriya Shema is kivasikin. That is kivasikin. Vasikin means those who are medaktek and mechabev the mitzvahs, and they're careful to do it in the exact perfect time that it should be done. The Vasikin, they would complete the Kriya Shema right before the sun begins coming up, and that is the ideal time to say Kriya Shema. Tanya Nami Hochi, we also have a brisa to this effect. Vasikin hayugoyim moiso im hanetzachamo. The Vasikin, they would finish the Kriya Shema right before the Netzachamo, Kedei sheyisma geula letfila, in order to then say right away the tefillah immediately as the sun starts to rise at the Netzachamo. The nimsim is power by yom, and then they will daven at the earliest possible time a person can daven lechatchila, that is at the Netzachamo. So again, the ideal time, says Abai, to say Kriya Shema is right before the Netzacham, what we call Somuch Lenetz, so that you can be then Soimech Geula L'Tfila. After saying Kriya Shema and Birkas Kriya Shema, Baruch Hashem Ga'al Yisrael, then immediately begin the Shmona Esrei right at the Netz, which is the first and most opportune time to daven Shmona Esrei. My Kro, Amar Reb Zeir, my Kro, what is the verse that supports this? Says Rabbi Zeir, Yiraucha im Shomesh v'lifnei Yareach Dor Dorim. That those who fear you with the Shemesh, with the sun, those are the ones who are then able to then Mekabel Ol Malchus Shamayim right before the Nates and daven Shmon Esrei at the Nates. Hey, Rabbi Yossi ben Eliakim Mishum Kehala Kadisha de Yerushalayim. He says, in regards to this inyan of being Someh Gula L'Tfila, the importance and the great schar a person gets, Kol HaSomech Geula L'Tfila, all who then are able to be Somech Geula L'Tfila, referring to this ideal time over here, right before the Neitz HaChama, he says Kriya Shema, and right at the Neitz HaChama, he daven Shmona Esrei. Kol HaSomech Gula L'Tfila Eino Nizoy Kol HaYom Kulo, he will not be damaged the entire day. Omar Rabbi Zeira, Ini, is this true? I was Somech Gula L'Tfila and I was damaged. So he's challenging the statement. Omolei b'mai itzikos. In what way were you damaged? The amtias aso lebei malko, because you brought the myrtles, the hadassim, to the house of the melech, to the king's palace. That's not a punishment. Hasom nami miboiloch lemehave agro lemechse ape malka. There you should have also given schar. You should have paid in order to then go to see the king's face, because it is a chus. Always a person to try to go run to see the Melech Yisrael. Not only to see the kings of Israel and give them homage and kavod, even to see the Malchei Akum is a mitzvah. So that if he will be zoiche to Olam Haba, he'll see the true distinction between Malchei Yisrael and Malchei Akum. He goes on to say that when you go to Eretz Yisrael, Ula, say the following: Ki ailis lahasom shoyel b'shlomo l'Rav Bruna achi b'may mikol achabura. Say shalom to my brother Rav Bruna amongst all of the people that he is with. The Adam Godolhu, he's a great man. V'sameach b'mitzvahs, and he rejoices in the mitzvahs. As follows. Here's an illustration of how he rejoices in mitzvahs, this great man. Zimna chada samuch geula tefillah. One time he was samech geula tefillah, where he then said Kriya Shema right before the Nates, said Baruch Hashem Ga'al Yisrael, and then he davened Shemona Esrei immediately as the sun begins to rise at the Neitz HaChama. V'lo posich chuka mipume kula yoima, and the smile on his face did not leave the entire day. That's how happy and joyful he was for the mitzvah min hamuvcha, saying Kriya Shema shel shacharis, and being samech gula l'tefillah. Hechi matzi samich. Now the Gemara wants to talk about being samech gula l'tefillah. When you say the bracha Ga'al Yisrael, and the bracha after the Shema, and then say the Shemona Esrei, ask the Gemara the following: V'ho Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Behold, Rabbi Yochanan said, B'tchila hu oimer Hashem svasai tiftach, ulevasoif hu oimer yilatzon reifi. The Gomer, in the beginning, before the Shemon Esrei, he says the pasuk, Hashem svasai tiftach, ufi yagiti losecho, and at the end of the Shemon Esrei he says, yilatzon reifi, vehegyon libi lefonecha, Hashem tzuri v'goy ali. Omer Bialozar, won't that be a hefsek? Being soimech geula letefila. Omer Bialozar deheit betfila shel arvis. Answers Rabbi Elazar, well, he's talking about the tefillah shel arvis, when there's not such an inyan to be soimech geula letefila. There you can say Hashem svasai tiftach, and then say the Shemon Esrei, and it's not going to be an interruption between Ga'al Yisrael, geula, and the Shemon Esrei, tefillah. The Gemara asked, wait a second, V'hom Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said, Ezu ben olam haba, zeh somech geula shel arvis, letefillah shel arvis, like we saw on Daf Daled Amud Beis, that Rabbi Yochanan says that a person is somech geula tefillah even during arvis. So you see that can't be an answer. Says the Gemara, Elom Rabbi Elazar, tehei betfilas hamincha. That which you can say, Rabbi Yochanan meant to say, you can say Hashem svasai tiftach before the Shemon Esrei, that's talking about Tfilas Mincha. Says the Gemara, a different answer. Rav Ashi Omar Afilu Tema Akulhu. You can even say that Rabbi Yochanan was saying Hashem Svosai Tiftach is appropriate and is not going to be an interruption for all of the tefillas, including Shacharis, as well as Mincha and even Mariv. Kivan de Kavua Rabbanim B'Tfilah since the Rabbanan enacted the pasuk of Hashem Svasai Tiftach Ufi Yagiti Losecha as part of the tefillah, then it becomes part of the Shemona Esrei, and it's not a hefsek at all. Says the Gemara, the Elotema Hochi, and if you don't say like this, then Arvis Hechi Mati Samich. Then how can you say Smichas Geula Tefillah in Arvis? We have even a greater interruption. We have a whole bracha, which is much longer, that we say Hashkivenu in between Geula and Tefillah. Rather, you have to say that since the Rabbanan enacted the bracha of Hashkivenu in the Geula, it's part of the Geula, and therefore it's not an interruption to be Samech Geula L'Tefillah. Hachanami kivan dekavur Rabban b'Tefillah richte dami. So too over here, when you say Hashem Svasai Tiftach before the Shemona Esrei, it's not going to be a hefsek, an interruption to be Samech Geula L'Tefillah. Says the Gemara weiter, Michti, that which you just said, that Rabbi Yochanan tells us that you would say Yulatzon Meifi v'Hegdion Libi L'Fonecha Hashem Tzuri v'Gali at the end of the Shemon Esrei. Ask the Gemara the following: Michti, Ha Yulatzon Meifi Mashma Levesoif uMashma Mikoro. It's Mashma Levesoif. That's true. You want to then ask HaKadosh for his appeasement, his ritzui, by saying Yulatzon Meifi after you daven. But it's also appropriate to state it beforehand, before you begin the davening. Says the Gemara, you should say it in the beginning as well. My taima taknu rabbanan la'achar yudches brachos lemer mikara. Why did they mesaken this pasuk of Yulatzon Reifi only after the Shemona Esrei, not before? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda b'rei Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, Hoyo v'loy Amru David, Ela la'achar Yud Ches Parshiyos. Since David HaMelech himself only said this pasuk of Yulatzon Reifi after 18 Parshiyos, therefore it's appropriate to do the same over here after 18 brachos. Lefikach takinu rabon la'achar Yud Ches brachos. In fact, the Gemara challenging, is it indeed 18 parshios? Hani Yud Ches? Yud Tes Havyon. There are 19. Says the Gemara to answer. Ashrei Ish v'lama rigshu goyim. The first two is Chada Parshahi. It's really one parsha, and therefore it's Yud Ches. Dom Rabbi Yehuda b'Rei Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi. Kuf Gimel Parshios. Omar David. 103 parshios of Tehillim. David HaMelech said, "V'lo Omar Hallelujah ad shero b'hapolosin shavashoim." And he didn't say Hallelujah until he saw the downfall of the wicked. Shene'emar, as it states, Yitamu chatoim min ha'oretz u'reshoim oid einam barchi nafshi es Hashem. Hallelujah. Hani Kuf Gimel. In fact, the Gemara Hani Kuf Gimel, this is after 103. Kuf Dalet Havyon. If you count, there's 104. Elishma Mina, no. Ashrei Ish v'lam rigshu goyim chad parshahi. There's another support to what we just said before, that the first two kapitelach of Ashrei Ish and v'lam rigshu goyim is really one parsha. Says the Gemara, Damar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmein Rabbi Yochanan. Kol parsha shahayisa chaviva al David posach bo be'ashrei v'siyim be'ashrei. Every parsha that was precious, especially precious to David HaMelech, begins with Ashrei and ends with Ashrei. Posach be'ashrei dirsif. Ashrei Ish, the first capital, begins with Ashrei. V'siyim be'ashrei, and it concludes itself with Ashrei. Dirsif, Ashrei kol choisi boy. And that's the second capital, which you have, what we said before, of Lam Rikshu Goyim. That's the same capital together, another support that there are 103 parshios in the Tehillim.